Hello there. So we're in Unity today. I want to show you what you can do with the inspector. So here I've got an inspector window open with a simple game object on it, and it has two fields. One is just an open field where you can add a value, and this is representing a price, and the other one is a usable items list. So imagine it's a pickup you can place within the game, and it's a list of items you can select that you want that pickup to be, and that's the price that's associated with it. This works, but we can make it better, and let me show you what it is. So this is like the super version, if you like. First thing I want to show you is the drop down list. It now gives you an image of what that represents. Much easier on the eyes, easier to see what's happening. The other great thing about this is we've actually added a slider, so you can adjust that image depending on resolution, size, whatever you prefer, so you can adjust that. And also there's a quick way just to disable that if you don't care. So we'll leave that set on, and I'll leave it on the dampeners. The other thing we've done here is the price. The price is now on a slider as well, so it's a lot easier to adjust. You still got the value at the far end, but you can enter directly. It just makes it a lot more friendlier to do. The other two things you see down here is a reset value, so we can click on reset value. It puts everything back to how it was. That wasn't 5 earlier, so let's just do that again. There you go, resets to 5. This extra data isn't being reset because that's like display data, it's not part of the object data, so I don't reset that. Right, and the other option we have here is take action, and if you look down here on the console window, it's currently empty, and if we click on take action, it just spits out a debug line, and this could be anything you want it to do with that object, fixing game data, whatever you wish. So this inspector and this setup allows you to have a much more user-friendly system, and this can be just for your own personal development, or you can use it for your own development in terms of the Unity tools as well. These steps just make things a lot easier to work with, and let me demonstrate how that's done. Okay, so now I want to show you how we achieve that, and I've now set up Unity and Visual Studio side by side so we can have an easier view without swapping packages all the time. This is my show inspector class, which is represented here. You can see show inspector, and all it has is that float of the price and the usable items, which is just a simple enum list. And that's all we have. So the very first thing we can do to improve our view in the inspector is to have a look at this price that we have as a float. And what we can do is we can add a range, and this is an attribute, so it goes above the field that you want it to affect. And we're going to say I want a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 10. And if I save that and just swap over, you'll see straight away we have a slider. Ta-da! And that slider allows you to go down to 1 and a maximum of 10, and it has any floating point value in between. If you didn't want to have the floating point values, you can just set it as an integer instead, and that obviously keep it at total numbers, no decimal points, but limits still apply. So I'm going to go back to float because I prefer that. So the next thing I want to do is add that button click to allow us to reset all the values back to like a default. In order to do that, we need to set up the inspector, the custom inspector. So in order to do that, down here in my scripts folder, I'm going to add a brand new folder called editor. And it has to be called editor. If it's not called editor, Unity won't pick it up correctly. So we'll pop into there, and I'm going to create a new script, and I'm going to call this show inspector underscore UI, and this is just my personal naming convention to put underscore UI on the end, just to make it clear this is the UI version of the other object. And if we reload in Visual Studio, we can see that kicks in, and we have a new project in here, which is all the editor side files, and we have a show inspector UI. Now this is currently going to do nothing, so what we need to do is tell it what object we're going to link it to. In this case it's the show inspector object, and that's done with another attribute. This one is on the class, so this is saying that this object here is going to be using this show inspector as its details. And the other thing we want to do is add an editor to this class, so it's not mono develop, it's an editor, and we can remove these. So in order for this to work with the object that we're interested in, we need to make a copy of it. We need a link to that object, and I'm going to have a private show inspector class object called _ show inspector. That's just my naming convention. And the other thing we want to do is define that, so when this is enabled it will just store that. So it takes the target, which is a Unity preset, casts it to my show inspector and stores it. And then the other thing that we want to do here is the bit that's going to change the display, and that's the onInspector GUI change. And the bit we still need to do in here, let's just sort this code out, is draw the default inspector. Now if we save this, it's updated the script, it's building. I want to go back to my game object. So if we go back here, this looks identical to how it used to be. However, now it's using this class, and it just means that we've got extra options that we can take just to quickly edit and change things. So the first thing I want to change is I want to add a button that's going to reset all the values, all this price and the usable item. I want to preset them back to a known user-friendly version. So in order to do that, I'm going to have the actual code to reset them within here. You don't need to, you can put it outside because they're both public, but I feel it's better to contain that it's within your inspector, within your game object. And then from the inspector itself is what we want to do is add a button press. So that goes in this inspector. I normally pop it after the default inspector, and it's just a case of GUI layout dot button and reset values. That's obviously going to be the name of the button we want. Then whatever actions you want to take within that button press obviously goes within the if statement. So here I want to do show inspector dot reset values, and that will update the values back to how they used to be. So let's pop back into here. Oh, I'm going to resave everything and then pop back into here. I hadn't saved my game object. So we now have this button here, so if we modify this and we modify that and click reset, it presets them back to the value that we're interested in. Now what we can do is change the colour of that button to make it ping a little bit more if you like, and that's just by changing the colour here. So we can say set this to green and the button turns green. There we go, and it does what you expect. Now because this is code, we can actually do something a little bit more special. So before we set the colour, is what I'm going to do is query the show inspector and have a look at its usable items, and if it's not already none, it will show the button. But if it is currently none, then we won't show the button because we're pretty much all on a default value already. There we go, so you don't get a button to reset it because it's basically how it should be. And if I select an item, we get the option appears. And if I reset it, the button obviously disappears. This shows you how you can customize your inspectors to be dynamic and only give your user or even yourself just the options that are applicable to the object in that state that it's in. The next thing I want to show you is how to display textures based on the enum list you have here. So already within this project I've got some textures, and basically these names here equal the names that I have as my enum, and that's how it does the relationship between the two. The important thing to note here, these textures can be of any type, but they have to be within a resources folder. This is so Unity can dynamically load them up, and it doesn't need a direct reference. You can just use the name, and that's what we're going to do here. Now, in order for our inspector to only know to display the image that's associated with that item and also change it when the item name changes, we need to store some information. So the first thing I'm going to do is store the old name. So this is like currently this is the name we're displaying, and then the next thing I want to store, it's more like a cache, is the actual texture itself. So we don't have to grab the texture every time. We can grab it once when we know it's changed and just use it until it's changed again. I'm just going to drop some code in here which is going to get the texture based off the name, and this is what I was talking about with the enum name equaling the texture name. And all it's doing is basically get texture with the name we're interested in. It tries to load it and returns it. If it fails for whatever reason, it will just return null. So in order to use that, before the buttons, because we want it directly underneath the drop down, let's pop this in here. Let's put this on a new line so we can see it. So first of all, if show item is null, i.e. we don't have a texture, or the name we stored is different than the one that's currently on this drop down, then we need to update everything. So the first thing we update is the actual show item, and this is where we do that get texture with the name of the item we're interested in. We're just doing a toString on it, and then we're updating the name of it so the name matches. This is to stop it like trying to grab the texture every time. It's a cache, if you like. So all that code is getting the item that we're interested in. Now the bit we want to do next is actually show it. So we'll just put a condition around it saying, well, if we have this item, then we can display it. And this is just using a label. And the label in this case is going to show the texture of a width 96 and a height of 96. And that's it. Let's just bring this back, save that, and pop back over here. Now if we select an item, it displays the item we're interested in. And if we hit reset, it all gets reset and goes away. This is one of the single most interesting features I like when I'm doing my game development. It just gives it something visual to look at, and it's a simple visual check rather than having to find the item in the list and read it and all this. So I do recommend doing this if you've got the textures to support it and everything. So the next thing I want to show you is, if you remember at the very start, we had a little drop down box with extra details in that allowed us to change the size of our icon. You can already see from the code that these options here to define the size of it, but we can hook that onto a field and make it so we can change it whenever we like. Now in order to have an extra item within here, we've got to go back to our show inspector, and I'm just going to copy a class in here for now. I'm going to have this as show icon, and it's already defined the range as 32 up to 256, and it's going to be icon size. It's a float, that's okay. And then in order to use that within the actual object itself, we want it as a public extra data, as I've called it here, and it will make it visible within the inspector because we have this serializable attribute on the class. If that wasn't there, it wouldn't appear in the UI. It's terribly important. So making sure both of those are saved, I'm just going to pop back and make sure it's appearing. Okay, here's our extra data. You can see we've got the icon, and that it currently does nothing. I've also noticed that it's actually below usable items, so is what we can do is just move that down in the code base and then swap back. And there you go, these are linked together again and they're not separated. So of course the next thing we want to do is use that within the inspector itself, so we can actually have an idea of what's going on. So the ways to do this is I want to wrap all of this icon code in an if statement. So we're just going to say, well, show inspector, extra data, show icon. If it says show icon, then we want to, show the icon. And if that's not there, then we're not interested. The other one that we want to do is the icon size. And as we saw earlier, it's the width and the height here. We can put in the icon size from that extra data. And then as soon as that's all saved and we check it in the UI, we've got our debug information here. Clicking the show icon hides the icon, and modifying the size allows us to be viewing it at different resolutions should we want to. Okay, so that's how to update your inspector windows to make them a little bit more interesting. I hope you like that. I hope it covers everything you needed to know. It's certainly not everything you could do with the inspector, but it's certainly a head start. So again, thank you all for watching. If you look at the description on this video, you'll see these links to the actual files you can use, and also the code is totally mapped out so you can see it in full. So thank you.